Hey on kids, this is section 4, module 16, and it's about income and expenditure. So what is disposable income? Well, really, disposable income is just simply your wages plus any government transfers minus your taxes. So the question then becomes, when you get some of these wages, etc., what do you do with that extra money? So your two choices are save it or spend it. And that's basically it. You're going to do one of those two things with your money. As we start looking at what happens when you save and spend, we're going to look at what's called the multiplier. Okay, so when you think about consumption or investment spending or whatever that might be, if you see an increase in your income, we can take some numbers here and calculate out how much of that income you're going to spend versus how much of that new income you're going to save. And when we do that, we can get what's called the marginal propensity to consume. All right. What is the marginal propensity to consume? Well, it's simply the change in consumer spending divided by the change in disposable income. So when you start looking at how much of that you're going to spend, well, the marginal propensity to consume is going to tell us how much you're going to spend. Now, we can also state this the opposite way. We can say, oh, if we know how much we're spending, then we also know how much we're saving. So the marginal propensity to save is simply the percent change in saving divided by the percent change in disposable income. So because you're either going to save it or spend it, we can write the equation just like over here, and you can see that your marginal propensity to consume plus the marginal propensity to save should equal the new dollar that you just obtained. And then we can write it different ways, right? We can say, oh, well, the marginal propensity to consume is just 1 minus the marginal propensity to save. Or the marginal propensity to save is just 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. So as we add these new dollars into the mix, we know how much of it we can spend and how much of it we're going to save. So what does this multiplying effect do for us? Basically, the multiplier states that if we put another dollar into the economy, that dollar is going to grow bigger than just the initial dollar that we have. Well, why? Well, because when I spend that first dollar, somebody is going to take that dollar, but then we know they're going to have a marginal propensity to spend some of it, but they're also going to take that marginal propensity and save some of it. But when they spend it, that means there's going to be more money in the economy. And that $1 is going to grow to a bigger number than just a dollar. So we'll talk about that consumption function a little bit later on in this section. But for right now, let's just assume that everybody in the economy spends 80%. Okay? Everybody in the economy, anytime they get money, a new dollar, they're going to save 20 cents of it, and they're going to spend 80 cents of it. And that's a pretty good assumption for what we do here in America. So when you look at this example, Miss Connie is a chicken farmer. Not surprising. And because she's a chicken farmer, she needs to go spend a new $1,000 on some chicken coops. And so she goes to Anthony's farm supply shop and spends $1,000. So that's our initial new spend, is the $1,000. When that money comes into Anthony, he's now going to do something with it, right? He's going to save a portion of it, 20%, but then he's going to take 80% of it and he's going to go spend it. So he is going to go to Marsha's boutique and he's like, yes, we need to buy that new prom dress for my daughter, right? So he's going to blow $800 on a dress. Wow, what a great dad. Now, Marsha, at her Marsha's boutique, she's got $800. Well, she's going to take 20% of that and save it, but then she's going to take $640 because she needs something fixed on her car. So she goes to Pat's Garage. Pat's Garage is going to get that $640. He's going to save 20% of it. And he's going to go take $512 because he's got a party and he's going to Diana's grocery store and he's going to blow all that cash. Diana now has $512. She's going to save 20% of it. She's going to go to Catherine's Catering Company because she's got a wedding coming up for herself. And she's going to put the down payment of $409 on some catering. This initial $1,000, by this point, if you added up all the dollars, it comes out to $2,361.60. That's more than double the amount of money that goes in at the beginning. If we were to play this whole thing out, that initial purchase, the new $1,000 that entered the economy, turns out to result in $5,000 of income and spending. That is how the multiplier works, because we know people don't just save it all. If the $1,000 would have went to Anthony's farm supply shop and he would have took that $1,000, buried it in his backyard in a can, then it stops right there. But that's not what people do. They save a portion of it, but they spend the rest of it. And then that rest just keeps on spinning around. We're going to look at this video in class. It's you can go find it. You just Google Economics USA. You can go see this one, or go to the slideshow, click on that link. It's going to talk about how John Maynard Keynes kind of came up with this idea during the Depression and said, you need to spend more money. And FDR was reluctant to do so. He tried through some of his programs, but it turns out it was never enough. And every time the economy kind of came up a little bit from his spending, he'd be like, oh, balance the budget, and it would come right back down. And it wasn't until World War II when everybody was like, okay, we just got to spend, to get war stuff's happening. That's when it finally was proven that if the government spends money, new injections of cash, it will also make this multiplier effect go. And you don't have to spend as much as you think to get the economy back on track. Now, are there points where you have to deficit spend? Yeah, there are. And so when you look at it, there's a couple of times when you're talking about like things that happen that lead to debt. A couple of these are tax breaks, right? When you get a tax cut from Ronald Reagan and then he kept spending, so there's no income coming in, but he kept spending going out, that's going to raise the deficit. When Bush does the same thing, right? It's going to raise the deficit. When you saw some wars, obviously going to raise the deficit. But at the end of Bush's term in like 2009, we had the Great Recession. All right. That recession did not turn into a depression, partly because if you look at February 2009 there, Obama stimulus happened. President Obama saw what was going on. And he's like, oh my gosh, the whole economy is going to like crash here if we don't do something about this. And he took a whole bunch of government dollars and propped up the banking industry, some of the car companies, etc. And that stimulus that got added in caused debt to happen for sure, but it also prevented us from going into a Great Depression. And a country, remember, is different than a person. Like a person, if you start accumulating debt, eventually you have to try to make, more money, more salary, more, to be able to pay that off, right? You need more cash coming in. A country is different. We don't necessarily need to raise taxes to cover the money. We could always print more money. Do you have to worry about inflation in that case? Yes, but you could always pay off your debt because you could just say, okay, we're just going to make some more money. And as long as inflation doesn't get out of control, you could pay it off, which is an interesting concept that we'll talk about later on in the semester. You can see here, we very rarely have a budget surplus, right? Almost always we deficit spend. And just a few years there, right around Bill Clinton time period, that we had some positive. So how does this multiplier work? Well, we have what's called the autonomous change in aggregate spending. So it's the initial spending that you get when something new money is in here. So the multiplier is simply the ratio in the total change in real GDP that happens caused by this autonomous change in aggregate spending. Okay. So when you look at the multiplier is 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. So when you think about this, 1 over the 1 minus marginal propensity to consume is also 1 over the marginal propensity to save, right? Because when you think about it that way, that when we looked at the first part, right, like it has to add up to 1. So really, you can write it either way to figure out what your multiplier is. So if I know, for example, my multiplier, right, my multiplier here equals 1 over, and then it's my 1 minus my marginal propensity to consume, and I know that my marginal propensity to consume is going to be like 80%, right? So I can say this is 1 over 1 minus 0.8. So really it's 1 over 0.2. And I can realize that my multiplier in this case is going to end up being 5, right? And so if I put a new dollar into the economy, that dollar is going to turn into $5 at the end of the day. And that's how you can use a multiplying effect to be able to change some things in terms of like, hey, maybe there's a recession. And if we were something like, oh, $5 billion or something needed to be injected, we don't really need to inject $5 billion. You could inject $1 billion. And because of the multiplier, it's going to turn into $5 billion. We're going to look at some Wisconsin employment in class. And this is a good spot to take a break because this section is a little long. We'll do the second half in another video. Till next time.